welcome back to my channel. Today I am here with my type 1 diabetes diagnosis story. November is Diabetes Awareness Month, so I figured why not let everybody know my diagnosis story. I was diagnosed almost 12 years ago, so if I don't recall everything, sorry, but my memory is not that great from 12 years ago, but I'm going to try to remember everything, but I'm sure I'll leave out like a couple of details. So here's my diagnosis story. Before I got diagnosed, I started experiencing symptoms like frequent urination, excessive thirst. I was super hungry all the time, and I was losing weight like crazy, and I had very low energy. I was super fatigued for a 9 and 10-year-old little girl. And I remember with my excessive thirst, I could never get enough to drink. I was constantly thirsty. I would drink water and drink water and drink water, and it would never be enough. And with drinking all the water and plus the ketones that I didn't know were building in my body, I was having to pee literally every 20 or 30 minutes. So you can imagine I hated going on long car rides and stuff. Like, I have lots of family that lives out of town, and our deer lease was out of town, and I hated being in the car because I would really frustrate my parents, and they would think that I was just wanting to stop at like gas stations and stuff to stop, I guess. I don't know. But I literally had to pee, and it was awful. But that was that. And then also I was super tired and fatigued, and I don't think I realized just how fatigued I was until looking back on like home videos and stuff like that. And if you hear that background noise, that's my husband and our dogs. I think he's taking them out to potty. And anyways, so also I had the night sweats really bad. Like, I would wake up soaking wet in sweat, and like my hair would be soaking wet, like I had just washed it or something, and my clothes would be soaking wet. I would be soaking wet. There'd be like a puddle of soaking wet sweat on my bed. It was nasty. And also, you know, I had to pee every 20 or 30 minutes. So during the night I had a hard time holding my pee, and I'd wake up like 5 times and go pee in the middle of the night, but sometimes I would pee in my sleep, and I didn't understand why I was wetting the bed all of a sudden at 9 and 10 years old. And I was super embarrassed. I wouldn't go to friends' house because I was scared I'd pee in their bed, and then, you know, that's really embarrassing at 9 or 10 years old. And I would eat, I would eat twice the size of an adult's plate and then still be hungry. I could never get enough to eat either. And my mom would get so frustrated and annoyed, like, oh my goodness, you're eating stuff off my plate, like, quit, like, eat your own food. And they just contributed that as I was a growing kid, and I was hungry, going through a growth spurt. But then also I was eating all that food, but I wasn't gaining weight. I was actually losing weight. And I was literally, I got so skinny, I was being called skin and bones at school because I literally looked like bones with a little bit of skin wrapped around the bones. I was literally skin and bones. And yeah, skin and bones. And finally, you know, my grandma's an RN, and she was like, there's something just not right, and she didn't want to overstep her boundaries, because no parent ever wants to think that there is something wrong with their kid. And so she didn't want to seem like a hypochondriac to my parents or anything, but she would drop hints every now and again, like, hey, Courtney's looking really thin, but she's eating all this food. Hey, Courtney's staying underneath the water faucet, you know, like, maybe we need to explore and investigate this a little bit more. And finally my mom was like, you know, you're right, like, she hasn't been acting like she's had much energy, and plus all this other stuff, so let's take her to the pediatrician. So those symptoms went on for well over 6 months. I don't know how I didn't end up in a diabetic coma. Who knows? But I didn't, luckily. But it was well over 6 months. And finally my mom took me to the pediatrician. And he told her, you know, Courtney has one of two things. She either has cancer or she has type 1 diabetes. And I think he was pretty positive it was type 1 diabetes, but he didn't want to just give away that diagnosis, so he said, you know, it could be cancer as well because she is losing lots of weight and not gaining any weight, and this isn't normal. So he ordered lab work, and my mom took me to get my lab work done. And I remember when I was getting lab work done, I had to pee in a cup, and I thought that was the most disgusting thing ever. And I told my mom I'm never doing that again. Little did I know I'd have to do it every 3 months, or 3 to 6 months for the rest of my life. But like, even, you know, my mom and the nurse that was, or the person drawing my lab work, was explaining to me about the butterfly needle, and, you know, like, I'm gonna have to poke you and everything. That didn't bother me. What bothered me was the fact that I had to pee in a cup. That grossed me out. I didn't like that. And so I got the lab work done, and I think it was either right before Christmas or right after Christmas. But I just remember the Christmas before I was diagnosed, which I was diagnosed January 3rd, 2007, so it was right after Christmas. But I don't remember. I think I had labs done after Christmas, but I remember that Christmas I felt extremely sick. Like, I felt sicker than I had ever felt before. And Christmas is my favorite holiday, and I was so sad because I thought I was getting a stomach bug or something on Christmas, and I was really upset about it. And my brothers and I would always wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, 3 or 4 in the morning every Christmas. And we woke up at that time that Christmas, and I stayed up about maybe 30 minutes, and we had woken up my mom, of course, and I told my mom, I'm not feeling good, I've got to go to sleep. And she knew that that wasn't normal, and so it was just kind of weird, but that was something that happened. And anyways, at some point we got the lab work done, and on the night before I was diagnosed, it was January 2nd, and I guess I was supposed to go back to school. I was supposed to go back to school the 3rd, and I guess we got the 2nd off. I don't know. My diagnosis date was January 3rd. And yeah, we didn't have to go back to school the 2nd. So we were supposed to go back to school on the 3rd, and my cousins were down from Dallas, and they were staying with my grandparents, and I begged my mom if I could just miss one more day of school over Christmas break and spend one more day with them. And my mom said yes, because I think she knew that I'd be getting diagnosed at any day. And so she let me go spend the night with my grandparents and hang out with my cousins. And the next day, on January 3rd, that morning, my pediatrician called my mom, and he told her that I needed to be to the hospital within 2 hours because I could go into a diabetic coma at any moment, that I was indeed a type 1 diabetic. And also another name for type 1 diabetes was juvenile diabetes. So he told my mom that, and of course I was at my grandparents' house. My mom was about 20 or 25 minutes away, and she called my grandma and was like, hey, you need to get Courtney in the bath. I don't know when her next bath or shower is going to be because she's going to have to go stay in the hospital. And I remember my grandma was in there like watching me take a bath and like helping me with my hair and stuff. And she kept tearing up, and I was like, Grandma, is everything okay? And she had told me, you know, like, you're going to have to go to the hospital, but I'm going to wait for your mom to come and tell you why and talk to you. And I was like, wait, what? Like, what's going on? Like, I knew I may have to go to the hospital, but what's going on? And my mom had already explained to me what the doctor had said, that I may have cancer or diabetes, and I knew what cancer was, but I did not know what diabetes was. And the word diabetes freaked me out because diabetes, and at 10 years old, I just, even though I knew what cancer was, I think it scared me more not knowing what diabetes was. And my mom had kind of explained a little bit to me about what that was, and that I may have one or the other. And so anyways, my grandma gets me out of the bath. My mom gets there, and she takes me into one of the bedrooms there and tells me, you know, I just got a call from your doctor, and you have diabetes, so we're going to have to go stay in the hospital a while, and the nurses are going to take care of you and stuff. And I was like, okay, all right. And I remember on the way there, it was like around lunchtime. It was right before lunch, and so my mom and dad and my grandma were all in the same vehicle taking me up to the hospital, and they stopped at McDonald's and got them something to eat for lunch, and they told me I couldn't have anything until we saw what the doctor said, which I understood. And so they just got me some water. I remember when we got to the hospital at Texas Children's, a nurse saw me with a McDonald's cup, and she was like, "Oh, what do you have in that cup?" and like kind of flipped out on me a little bit, and I was like, "Oh, it's water. What's wrong with it? It's water." And she was like, "Okay, good, it's just water, but I need you to quit drinking that because we need to wait and see, what the doctor says. We don't need to be drinking anything right now." And I was like, "Okay." So that kind of scared me, but I didn't cry or anything. I still hadn't cried at this point. But I was like, why did this nurse just flip out on me for drinking water? And they got me in an ER room, and I believe we had to stay in that ER room for about 6 hours. And during that time, lots of family was coming in and coming in and out, and they couldn't stay for long because it was like an ER room. And finally, after about 6 hours, we got admitted to a normal, one of those huge rooms in Texas Children's, and I would have to be there a week and a half. So nurses were coming in, and I remember I got this really nice nurse who brought like this book of Band-Aids and was like, "Oh no, you're in the hospital, let's put a Band-Aid on it, pick out what Band-Aid you'd like." And I got to flip through this like binder full of different kinds of Band-Aids, and I picked this light blue one with penguins on it. I remember that. And also some endocrinologists came in and gave me a teddy bear that had little patches all over him, and a t-shirt that said JDRF, which is Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And the patches were for you could give the teddy bear shots, and I just thought that was the coolest thing because a billion nurses were coming in and giving me shots like as soon as I had gotten to the ER. And anyways, so we were in that room, and they brought me all the teddy bear and stuff, and I was like, oh wow, like I'm getting this teddy bear, I'm getting all this cool stuff, but yet I gotta take shots. But I wasn't crying. I was like, this is okay. And actually I was doing so well, I think it kind of disturbed the nurses and my parents because they asked me, you know what this is, right? Like, it's not going to go away. You're going to have this the rest of your life unless they find a cure. And I was like, oh yeah, I've got to have shots the rest of my life. But hey, at least I'm alive. Like, that's nice. So I was taking it really extremely well for a 10-year-old. And that just really disturbed everybody that I was taking it so well. I guess they thought that I would just cry and stuff and be afraid of the shots, but I was just like, I think my mom had prepared me really well with explaining what diabetes was to me and explaining, that I could have cancer. And after she had explained the diabetes part to me, I still didn't fully understand it, but I knew that I would probably rather have the diabetes than the cancer. And so I think that helped with how well I took it once I got my diagnosis and was in the hospital. But all the nurses were like, oh my goodness, you're taking this so well. But I think it was a good thing that I was taking it well. And we had to go, while I was in the hospital, we had to go to lots of diabetes education courses, and I had to watch this video all about diabetes, and they were teaching me, or teaching my parents and I, how to give me syringe shots and checking my blood sugar and all of that. And I stayed there a week and a half because I could not get rid of the ketones, and I was so malnourished and dehydrated and stuff that they just decided to keep me there for a while. And of course I had to go through all the education courses and everything. And I had went to Radio Lollipop in Texas Children's, and I had done things like that, and they got me up and walking around the hospital, and it was the day before I got to go home, I was supposed to get to go home that day, and I remember it was nighttime, and I was thinking I'm going to get to go home at any minute. They're finally going to let me go home, and I was so excited. I wanted to get back to my toys in my room and my home and what I was familiar with. And I remember right before I lost it, they had just told me, and then my grandma had called, and she was checking on me and was just wanting to chat with me on the phone, and I started hysterically crying. Like, I don't think I had ever at that point in my life cried as hard as I cried. And my mom like grabbed the phone from me and was like, "Oh my goodness, what'd you tell her, Mom? Like, what? Why is she all of a sudden crying? She's done so well and everything." And my grandma was like, "I didn't say anything. I don't know what did I do? Did I say the wrong thing? We were talking about what I had got for Christmas or something." And I was crying so bad I could not talk, and they kept asking me like, "Courtney, what is wrong with you? What's going on?" And I had cried literally for 2 hours straight, hysterically crying. And they were like, "Courtney, what is going on? Are you hurting? What's wrong with you? Like, are you feeling bad? What is going on?" And I was like, "I want to go home. I've been here a week and a half, almost 2 weeks. It was over a week and a half. And I am ready to go home. I got told that I was going to possibly get to go home. I thought I was going to get to go home, and I can't go home." And I cried and cried and cried. Then my mom started crying, which I felt really bad about, but, you know, circumstances. And I just cried and cried and cried for 2 hours straight. And my mom was trying to keep me positive. My mom was a rock star, because if I was a mom and my kid got diagnosed with diabetes, which it could happen, but she was just a rock star. She handled it amazingly as well. Like, that woman is my rock. So my mom stayed at the hospital with me constantly and never left my side. Besides, like, my grandma would come in and be like, "Hey, you need to go get some lunch for yourself," and she'd go to the cafeteria and bring it back and stuff. But she never left my side. And anyway, so I had that meltdown, and, you know, I was so upset. Like, I was shaking. It was the weirdest meltdown I had ever had. And finally I got it together, and I quit crying, and it was time for me to go to sleep. And so they took me back to the room, and I mean, I guess we did what we had to do. I got more insulin and whatever. I can't really remember all those details. And then the next day I got told that my ketones were gone and I get to go home. So I was so excited that I finally got to go home. And of course they told us that we'd have to come back in every 2 weeks for a couple of weeks, or a few weeks, because my parents still needed a few more diabetes education courses to do. But for the most part, I get to go home. So I went home, and I remember walking out of the hospital. I hadn't got to go outside for that whole week and a half. And I got out there, and I just remember like smelling the fresh air, and it probably wasn't even that fresh because it was Houston, and there's probably like lots of pollution and stuff, but anyways, well, there's pollution everywhere. Anyways, I don't know, I just thought it was awesome, and I was like, oh my gosh, it feels so good outside, and I get to breathe fresh air. This is amazing. And I was running through the parking garage just like so excited because I was finally outside and I was finally getting to go home. And on the way home, I had lived like a little bit over an hour away at that time, and actually almost 2 hours away. And on the way home, I remember sitting there, and I think it had finally clicked to me that, oh my gosh, like, this doesn't just stop at the end of the hospital door. I'm taking this home with me. Like, this literally is my life now, which it's amazing because I'm going to get to live, but I have to have shots the rest of my life and stuff. And so I think I just had like a talk with myself in the car, like in my mind, looking out the window, like, oh my goodness, this really is my life now. And at that moment, I think it clicked to me that I'd have to grow up just a tiny bit sooner than everybody else and learn symptoms and learn my body well. And I had a lot on my plate with the help of my amazing mom and my dad, but my mom was mostly the one that took care of me. And I don't know, it clicked to me, and I still didn't, I didn't cry. Like, I had got all my crying out the night before when I didn't get to go home. And I don't know, that was like the moment that it clicked to me that I'm diabetic the rest of my life. And we got home, we got settled in. I was on these insulin syringes for, I want to say about a year and a half. And also I go to my diabetes endocrinologist every 3 months, and I have been going to an endocrinologist every 3 months since being diagnosed. And anyway, so I was on the syringes for about a year and a half, and then I got upgraded to insulin pens, and I was on the pens most of the time. I didn't get my diabetes pump until, I think it was in 2012 or 2013 I got my insulin pump. But so I was on insulin pens for however long before that. And before my insulin pens, when I was still on syringes, I got to try out this little, I think it was called a port or something, and I put it on my stomach, and the thing actually ended up being recalled, but it was so painful. It was supposed to help with taking syringe shots. Like, you could put it in that little porthole, the syringe shot, like for a few times, like for a week, I think, and then you had to like change out the port. But the syringe could go in there instead of poking like everywhere. But that thing hurt so severely bad that I thought that's how a pump would be for some reason, and I was completely against getting an insulin pump ever since I had that port back when I was on syringes. So then I got the insulin pens, and then I think it was 2012, because I started dating my husband in 2013, and I remember it was right before I started dating him that I got my insulin pump. So, let's see, I'm trying to remember all this stuff. My A1C was a 13 and 14 for many, many, many years, and most of that was because of me, because I went through burnout phases, which everybody goes through burnouts, but you can't give up on yourself, and I kind of did and didn't take as great of care of myself as I should have, and it was getting so bad right before I got the pump that I was in and out of the hospital every couple of months with hyperglycemia and diabetic ketoacidosis, which hyperglycemia is where your blood sugar runs super high. Hypoglycemia is where your blood sugar runs super low, and you could have seizures, coma, unconsciousness, etc. And hyperglycemia, you could have a coma as well, and even death with both. So I was in and out of the hospital with hyperglycemia and diabetic ketoacidosis, which is, actually, here, let me read you a definition just to explain that exactly correctly, because I know what it is, but I feel like I can better explain it by reading off of WebMD. Or actually, this is Mayo Clinic. Diabetic ketoacidosis, also known as DKA, is a serious diabetes complication where the body produces excess blood acids called ketones. And it can make you super weak and dizzy and out of breath and, let's see, excessive thirst. You get all the same symptoms that you do with hyperglycemia because it comes from hyperglycemia. And so I was in and out of the hospital with that. It would make me severely sick. Like, imagine a stomach bug times 1,000. And I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating about it. It is the most awful, excessive, just awful sickness ever that I know of. And I was in and out of the hospital with that, and with all of that and my age and being a teenager and everything, it also came with severe, severe depression. I was tired of it. I didn't understand, like, why did I get diabetes? Why did God pick me? Why me? And so I was really struggling with all of that. Plus my age, I was a teenager. I was 13, 14, 15 years old. And, you know, at that point in life, you start having crushes and all that. And I remember one time, I had just switched to a new school, and I was walking in the hallway, and there was these two guys walking behind me, and they didn't think that I would hear them, or maybe they did. And I was walking in front of them, and one of the guys was like, "Oh wow, she's cute," and the other guy was like, "No, you don't want her, she has..." And it really hurt my feelings because I started thinking, like, at that moment, I was just like, oh my gosh, they're so ignorant, like, those idiots, like, it's not contagious, you're not going to get it, it's, like, idiots. But then I remember I went to Spanish class, because I was on my way to Spanish class, and I was sitting there in that period, and the whole time I couldn't focus, because I was sitting there thinking about what those boys had said, which was super dumb. And, I was like, oh my goodness, this could affect my whole future, like, this disease that I have, type 1 diabetes, could affect my whole future. Like, what if nobody wants to date me or like me or love me because I'm different and I have type 1 diabetes, which I mean, I just didn't understand. I was going through a whole thing. Super burnt out, not wanting to deal with it, not taking care of myself, and just going down a really, 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 really bad tunnel. And I just thought, you know, like, I'm not going to have a future with this. And so it just kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and darker and darker and darker and darker. And finally, my last time I was in the hospital, it was so bad. It was the closest I have ever came to death with my type 1 diabetes. I was in and out of consciousness, and they were ready to knock me out into a diabetic coma, or a medically induced coma. Because I was struggling so much, and I had more carbon dioxide, I think it was, in my body than I did oxygen, and they had me hooked up to oxygen and everything, and it was just not great. But that happened, and I remember, like, in and out of consciousness, I unconsciously but consciously told the nurse I just want to die, because I had felt so bad. I felt like I was having a heart attack. My chest ached. Like, this area ached so badly. I was in so much pain. I'm guessing from the carbon dioxide or whatever was, I don't know, I think it was, they said the carbon dioxide was making me in pain. And right after it came out of my mouth, like, my consciousness was like, oh wait, I don't want to die. Like, I still have a long life to live. And the nurse, I remember, like, looked at me and was like, you do not want to die. Don't say that. Like, you're going to fight. And it was seconds before they were gonna trach me or whatever they were gonna do and put me in a medically induced coma, and all of a sudden my levels started leveling out and doing better, and it was like a miracle had happened, because the doctors literally told me that I was 60 seconds away from being knocked out. Like, the tubes were all on the bed, everything was ready. And so it was a miracle. I didn't have to be intubated, like nothing. I just started doing better, so it was amazing, and it was a wake-up call. And from that moment on, I wanted to do better, and I wanted to strive to do better. It had been years, and my A1C was at a 13 and 14, which is awful, 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 awful. I think 14 is one of the highest you can go, and you do not want to be that. Normal is like a 5. I think it's like a 4.5 to a 6. For somebody that is a normal person without diabetes, and it is what diabetics strive to be. So and A1C is the average number, your average blood glucose level, which is your blood sugar level, over a period of about 3 months. So I don't know why I'm so out of breath filming this. Let's see, where was I? Oh, so that happened. I was in the hospital, and it was my wake-up call. I was like, no, I have a bright future ahead of me, but I have to start taking care of myself now if I want that future. And, you know, I've got to take care of my body and my organs, and I've got to look out for myself. So I decided I wanted to finally start taking care of myself, and my grandma found this lady that had an Omnipod pump, and it was a tubeless pump. I think it's one of the only, it may be the only pump that is a tubeless pump, and I always knew I didn't want to have a pump with tubing because I had heard horror stories about it, and I didn't want my tubing getting caught on everything. I'm super clumsy, so I just felt like that would be a disaster, and plus I was worried about appearance and how a pump with tubes would look on me, and I feel like it just labeled me as a sick person, and I didn't want to be considered sick. So we met with, my grandma set up this meeting with a lady that had an Omnipod pump, and we went to a restaurant and talked with her, and she sold me on the Omnipod insulin pump. And I remember her standing up, and she was like, "Look at me, where is my pump?" And I looked her up and down and like turned her around and everything, and I was like, "You're not wearing a pump, I don't see anything." And she was like, "You're wrong, it's on the side of my leg, it's right here." And she pointed it out to me, and I was like, "Oh wow, I didn't even notice you were wearing that." And she said, "Yeah, it's a tubeless pump." And so she taught me all about the Omnipod, and she had sold me on the pump. And at that moment in time, I think my A1C was a 12. And my Texas children's doctors and endocrinologists had always told me that I wasn't allowed to even think about getting a pump until my A1C was at an 8.0. And that was a long ways away. And so I just didn't feel like I was getting the care that I needed with my Texas children's doctors. And my mom and I spoke about it and talked about it, and she agreed. And so we fired them as my doctors, and because I was just staying unhealthy with them, and I don't think that they really thought, I don't know, I felt like I didn't get the attention that I needed and the education that I needed. Well, I got plenty of education. They were really good about that, but they didn't see just how big of a problem I was and how burned out I was and all of that. So I switched to another doctor, and that doctor referred me to my current doctor, whom I have now, and who got me started on the Omnipod tubeless insulin pump. And I am doing better than I ever have been. I am now 22 years old. I have had diabetes 12 years on January 3rd, and I'm doing great. I have a husband who loves me and thinks that I'm completely normal. He's never looked at me differently or ever thought that diabetes made me different, so I'm really appreciative of that. And I'm super healthy. My A1C is a 6.0 right now. It's the lowest that it has ever been, and I absolutely love my tubeless Omnipod. And if you're diabetic and you're thinking about getting a pump, don't be scared. Don't be worried. I mean, I know it's hard to say because I wouldn't have listened either, but it's completely worth it, and your life will change forever with a pump. Having a pump makes you feel more normal and gives you way more freedom than what you have with pins or syringes. And I can eat whenever I want, whatever I want for the most part. Whenever I need to give myself insulin for a snack, I can. I'm not on a time schedule anymore. I mean, I am a little bit because I can only go so long without eating or I'll have hypoglycemia. But I'm doing great, and I'm so happy. Sorry I'm saying a lot. I'm just trying to remember everything. But it's been a long road, but I am happy with where I am now. I can only get better. I know that there's always room for improvement, and I can say that I have been at every level that there possibly can be with diabetes. Well, maybe not possibly can be, but I have been at the burnout stage. I have been at the cranking up the insulin syringe to however much insulin I thought I needed without doing the math, and I mean, I've been there, and it's not healthy, and it's not good for you, and you do have a future, and your future is bright, and you've got to take care of yourself. So if you're diabetic and you are in the burnout stage, you know, I'm really sorry, and you're not alone, and I'm sure there are lots of YouTube videos on the internet to kind of help you out and lift your spirits a little bit. And just know that your body and you come first, and your health is so important. And just please take care of yourself and know that you are not alone in this. And I'm sure there are support groups, diabetic support groups. Well, I know there are. And I really hope that you can get the help that you need if you are struggling. And if you'd like to comment down below, I would love to chat with you about it in the comments, or yeah. And if your diabetes is going great, you know, that's awesome. Great for taking care of yourself and dealing with the stuff that you have to deal with every day. I know that taking care of diabetes is not easy. It never will be easy. It's always a constant battle, but you have to battle it out and be the strong soldier that I know that you are. And that is my story. I would love to hear your stories. So if you want to film a diabetes story and put it on YouTube, you know, do a my diabetes story tag. I don't know, but that is my story. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that I brought awareness to type 1 diabetes or juvenile diabetes, and I will go into more detail in another video. But for now, that is my story. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and stay beautiful.